You're listening to Mark of the Maker. And this is episode 5.
Welcome to Mark of the Maker. I'm Sean Kendrick, and I'll be your host for episode 5. On this episode, we'll be talking to Mark Stheiner. We'll talk to him about what brought him to knife collecting and what's kept him interested and involved in the community. With me, as always, we have Tom Crine. Tom, how are you doing, man?
Good, man. Survived the flu.
Good to hear. I was worried for you, man.
Thanks.
We have Michael Birch.
How's it going, man? I really wanted to add like a guitar intro into that.
It'd have to be Sun. Yeah.
One note, that's all it takes.
And we have our man of the hour tonight, Mark Stheiner. How are you, Mark?
I'm well, Sean. How are you?
I cannot complain. All right, well, let's get this ball rolling. Mark, if you would, open us up, give us a little background on yourself, and we'll do this thing.
Okay. I'm Mark Stheiner. I live in Michigan, kind of what would be considered the southeast part of Michigan, in the Lower Peninsula, and born and raised here. I live probably 5 or 6 miles from the house I grew up in, which is almost exactly in the middle, about 5 or 6 miles the other direction from the house my wife grew up in. So we're both from this area, grew up here, spent our whole lives here, and just never really had a reason to move away or go someplace else. And it's sort of for folks not familiar with this part, we're about an hour west of Detroit, so it's probably not fair. You guys might laugh if I called it a rural area, but it's outside the suburbs. It's out in the country a little bit. We had a little bit of property where I lived when I was growing up, not like massive property like Birch had, but we had a little bit of space and we backed up to a horse farm and stuff. And my wife actually lived out further than I did, more out toward farm country, and they had a big piece of property they lived on as well. So, I would call it generally out in the country a little bit.
What was it like for you? What'd you do as a kid? What was your hobbies as a kid, I guess?
Well, that's a good question.
Did you have friends, or how'd that go?
Doubtful.
Hard to believe, but
tough
yes.
questions come first.
Yeah, right. Indictment.
It's like a roast.
Yeah, it is kind of. Yeah, that was one of the hard parts about where we lived, was it wasn't in really a town. It was kind of in a little bit more spread out kind of spot. So I did have a couple friends that lived nearby that were within, bicycle riding kind of distance. And, I have 2 younger sisters. And so we did a lot of time cruising around on the bicycles, and with a little bit of ride, we could get into this, not really a town, but like a little spot where that actually had a little general store and a library and a hardware store and stuff. So inevitably for me growing up in the summertime was, cruising around on our bicycles and playing baseball. And I spent a lot of time at the library. My folks were real strong on the reading thing, and I did a lot of reading as a young guy. So yeah, it was good. It was, not a ton of kids around, but there was plenty to keep me busy, and the farm next door was pretty cool. So I worked there a bit when I was a young guy, helping out on the farm and putting up hay and that kind of stuff. So good experiences.
Oh, very cool.
A lot of similarities between all of us about the, a lot of reading and a lot of, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What other stuff do you want to know?
Tell us about college, what you do for a living, your career, stuff like that.
Okay. So probably a little bit of family stuff tells a little bit of that story. My dad worked for General Motors, and he worked at what was called the Willow Run Assembly Plant, which was a factory that built a bunch of different things. They actually built that plant in the late 50s and started production in 1959. And they built the Chevy Corvair. And
cool.
So that was the Corvair production plant. And so they started out building Corvair, and then later on they built the Chevy 2, which kind of was the Nova. And then eventually they built the Chevy Citation, and then the Pontiac Bonneville, which GM called the H car. And then later on the rear-wheel drive Caprice and Buick Roadmaster and stuff like that. So he had a very lengthy career there. He did 34 years there. And so he was a General Motors guy. Well, my grandfather on my mom's side was also a General Motors guy. He worked at the Fisher Body Flint plant number 1. So he was there at the time of the sit-down strike in the early formation of the UAW and all kinds of stuff. So my grandfather was a General Motors guy. He worked for GM for 43 years. My dad, after he got out of the service, like lots of people around our area, he went to work at General Motors in the factory. So that was kind of the direction I went. You know, I think lots of people when they're growing up, certainly in my case, you know, my father worked at a car plant, and you know, he would ask me when I was young, hey, what do you want to do for a living? You know, what do you think you want to be when you grow up? And, you know, I said, I want to do what you do. And I think that's sort of a natural thing. And he wasn't super fond of that idea. He didn't want me to work in the factory, I don't think. And, I did well in school and stuff. So he kind of keyed me in on this thing where, there was a school that at one point was actually operated by General Motors. It used to be called General Motors Institute, and it was basically the General Motors sort of like engineer factory, I'll call it, where it was a co-op program. You'd go to school for 12 weeks, and then you'd work for 12 weeks and alternate back and forth and you know, basically earn your bachelor's degree in engineering while you worked at a General Motors facility. And he said, hey, that's what you should do. You shouldn't come work in the factory. You should, you know, keep rocking on school. And then if you really want to do car stuff, go through this kind of program where you can kind of pay your way through school with this co-op opportunity. And then when you're done, you know, 9 times out of 10, these guys get hired to stay at GM, and, you know, then you could be an engineer for the company. And so that's exactly what I did. So that probably from the time I was in junior high school, that was sort of my plan.
Is that school still around?
It is. It's changed names a couple times. It used to be called General Motors Institute. Then they just called it GMI and claimed that it didn't mean anything. It was at the time General Motors actually got out of the school from a financial perspective, and that's when I went there. And then today they're called Kettering University, and they're still there, and they still do this same co-op program. We still have kids coming through on co-op at General Motors from that same school. So
it's a pretty smart way of doing school. I mean, it's just, you know, where people learn, they get, you know, the work experience, and that pays for your school sort of thing. You know, we've got one around here called School of the Ozarks where they, you know, it's more like farming, you know, agriculture, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's almost like a trade school thing, but for engineers. It wasn't like a typical university where, you know, like I had most of my friends that I went to high school with, we live very close to Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where the University of Michigan is. And so most of the kids I went to school with in high school went to the University of Michigan. So, you know, I went the opposite direction. I went up to Flint to go to college at this GM school. And when I was at school, everybody was an engineer. Like every kid on my hall in the dorm was an engineer. They were all science and math nerds. I mean, everybody is eyeballs deep in the engineering thing. And when I went to visit my friends at the big university, it was always kind of a trip to me because, you know, they might be the only engineering kid on their hall, or, you know, one of the guys was an architecture student and he was the only make stuff kind of person that was on his hall. The rest of the people were, you know, liberal arts studies or art major, or, you know, that was very, very diverse. And so, very different experience because we were all so focused on engineering stuff.
Yeah, you guys.
But in the end, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so you basically had it kind of drilled down, you know, so you had kind of this group of folks that all were doing the same thing, which I guess would be pretty nice, you know, as far as focus and whatnot.
Yeah, like all things, it was nice in some ways and hard in other ways, right? It was hard in that it was very, very, very competitive. You know, there were a lot of best of the best kind of kids that went to school there, and that made it a pretty challenging place to go to school, at least for me. I did fine, but, you know, it was a hard school. And the other thing was that because the school terms were compressed, right? They were only 12 weeks long. The coursework was compressed as well. So when I was there at school, it's always funny to me now because both my kids, my oldest is finished with college and my youngest one is in her second year. You know, they'll have a 15 credit hour course load, and that's a lot. And at the school I went to, it was typical to have a 20-hour course load, or, you know, 20 credit hours. We had very heavy course load, and it was very compressed. So it was a pretty intense place to go to school. The really awesome part about it was that I had an excellent mentor on the work side of things. So, you know, my dad worked at this Willow Run assembly plant where they built cars. It was a car assembly plant. They didn't actually produce parts, but they put pieces of stuff together to create cars. And so that was the plant he worked at. It's 2 million square foot assembly plant. When I went to go to school, part of the deal at the time was you would apply to the college and you'd get into college. And then on the other side, even if you got into the school, you still had to go find a co-op job. And so I said, hey, you know, maybe I'll come work at the assembly plant for my co-op. And he said, no. Next door is this transmission plant. It's huge. They have an engineering facility there with like real test labs and other stuff. He goes, I'm going to see if I can get a name of someone there to get you in contact so you can see if you can get an interview over there. And so I ended up working for this transmission part of General Motors. The old trade name or the old sales name was the Hydromatic part of GM, which is automatic transmissions. And that plant, you know, the plant my dad worked at put cars together at, you know, 50 an hour, right? Very high volume production vehicle assembly plant. And it was 2 million square feet. The Hydromatic place where I worked was 5 million square feet. So 2.5 times as big. The place is a mile long, like an actual mile from one end to the other. It was massive, massive factory. And attached to that factory was an engineering facility that was built, I guess I'm not even sure, probably in the 70s or 60s. And they had a complete engineering operation there. That's where all of the transmissions were engineered, was out of that sort of satellite building that was attached to the factory. So that's where I ended up doing my co-op, was through Hydromatic there in Willow Run.
Is that, you don't work there anymore? You've moved to a different place, right?
Yeah, I'm in a different spot now. That place in Willow Run, both of those factories are closed. So the assembly plant where my dad worked at actually closed in 1992. And they produced cars like the Chevy Caprice, the full-size rear-wheel drive Caprice that was a police car for a long, long time. Buick Roadmaster, there was an Oldsmobile on that same platform. And there were two other assembly plants, I think, at the time that produced that car. And the Willow Run assembly plant where my dad worked just, you know, they said, hey, we don't need this volume. We don't need to build any more cars there. We need to shutter that plant. So it closed in 1992. My dad was old enough that he could retire at that point. So he basically took a semi-early, I mean, he still had 34 years of service, but he retired at that point. And our Hydromatic plant remained open, and it actually ran all the way up until the bankruptcy in 2009. I left there in, when was it? Early 2000s, I guess, and moved up to the place called the Milford Proving Grounds, which is the GM big test track place, and I've been there ever since then, since the early 2000s.
Now, when you're in college, how many times did they have you watch the movie Gung Ho?
There was an entire class dedicated to Gung Ho.
So, and if you haven't seen that, then you're probably way too young. So that's an old deep cut.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Mark. At the plant where your dad worked, you said they made the Bonneville?
They made a version of the Bonneville, yep.
Yeah, I actually had a 1972 Bonneville.
Okay.
That thing was crazy.
Yeah. They produced, I think, a later version of the Bonneville that was sort of round and trying to look futuristic and front wheel drive that had a supercharged V6 in it as an option and stuff.
That was during the 90s.
The later generation.
I think.
80s, 90s time frame, yeah.
My sister had a Citation that not quite the same.
Right.
Corvairs were cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was very interesting things. That factory, like lots of places, they embraced the fact that they were the Corvair plant and that it was a special car. And I remember sometime, I guess I don't know what year it was, but sometime probably when I was maybe when I was in high school or middle school, the folks at the factory actually, they let them do a special project where they found or dug up or went out and bought parts and basically built a new Corvair. And they had a sort of this round, very old school, all glass structure at the front of the assembly plant. They used to call it the fishbowl, and they would put whatever they were currently building. They'd put a nice, cool looking version of it up there in the fishbowl. Well, when they did this Corvair project, it was pretty cool because they parked it up in the front in this big glass, entryway at the factory. And, it was a point of pride thing. It was pretty neat that they did that.
They were neat cars. I mean, rear engine. I had a friend in college that had a convertible one, and that was a cool car.
The shifter was strange there on the dash, though. That was an odd configuration.
It was a very innovative car. I mean, like I said, they started producing those things in 1959, and some of the stuff that car has going on is very unique and innovative for the time frame. So certainly people around here that were sad to see that car die off because of safety complaints and other stuff. That was kind of the Ralph Nader thing. That's a very common thing for people around here to talk about, is how that car was sort of ahead of its time.
Yeah. Very cool.
One of the interesting things about working in Ypsilanti or outside Ypsilanti in this Hydromatic Willow Run plant was it's a very historic and important place from a U.S. history perspective. It's sort of like one of the key cogs in the military industrial complex kind of thing. That factory was opened in 1941. It was designed by Albert Kahn, so it's got very cool, some very distinctive features in some of the building structure that used to be there. And they actually built the B-24 Liberator bomber there, and they built those things. They would roll one every hour out the back of that place. And
dang,
it'd be amazing.
1 hour of a B-24. Wow. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And at both of those factories are adjacent to an airport, and basically they would build these B-24 Liberators, and they had a huge bay door along the one end of the factory, and they'd roll the door up and roll a bomber out and fire it up and fly it off. So it was a pretty interesting thing, and it's one of a series of places around the country where the whole Rosie the Riveter thing came from. And I think one of the ladies that they consider the Rosie the Riveter, I think there's several of them now that are kind of credited with that, basically were part of that Willow Run assembly place that built those B-24 bombers. So a lot of really cool history there.
Is that the place you were telling me about the other day that they're looking to turn into a historical spot so that they can't tear down the factory? Is that what you were telling me about the other day?
Yeah, there was a kind of on the other side of the airport from where that factory was. There was a group that established a thing they called the Yankee Air Force, and the Yankee Air Force was a group of volunteers that would find and restore old warbirds. And they were really history buff, airplane nerd kind of guys, very into it. And they had, I think they have a B-24. I don't remember if it's a 24 or 25, but that Yankee Air Force group has a series of planes. They had a B-52 that sat out there, so every day I'd drive by a B-52 sitting out on the tarmac. They wanted to keep the original part of the plant, kind of the end. There was like this couple million square foot area where they actually built the B-24s. They wanted to try to preserve that space. And so I think today the 3 million square feet of that place is knocked down, and at least a chunk of it, the historical part, I think is still there. And there was a whole huge effort to try to raise a bunch of money to kind of preserve it. And then the Yankee Air Force would intend to move off into that spot. So they were in this, their idea was they'd be in this historic building where these very important World War II planes were built, and pretty cool thing.
Yeah,
no doubt.
So that factory ended up becoming a Kaiser Frazer plant after the war. Ford built that plant, but didn't want to actually be the owners of it. They wanted the government to be the owners of the plant. So they built the factory, and basically it became U.S. government property. I don't know if the government paid for it or how that all worked, but in 1947 it was sold as surplus, which is kind of a weird thing to think about, to sell a whole factory as surplus stuff, but that's basically what it was. So Kaiser Frazer bought it, and they built cars there for a while. During the Korean War, they built the C-119 flying boxcar. So they kind of flip-flopped a little bit, and they'd get back into military production as needed. And then GM bought it in the early 50s, and started building transmissions there. And they actually built M16s and M39s there, or 20 millimeter cannons that were on the Vietnam era, Iroquois Huey helicopters. And I think that whole facility had a interesting and important flex, right? They'd build for civilian times and build cars and other transmissions and other stuff. But when the time came that they needed to, they would build military stuff. And, it's kind of back to the, once great industrial nation kind of scene or whatever. But
didn't the Kaiser make a car that had a door that went into a panel? Are those the ones that did that one? Kind of a funky kind of design.
Maybe so.
I don't know. I bet your Craigslist tools are a lot better than the tools I find on my local Craigslist. I bet there's some amazing machinery up there.
Yeah.
I'm thinking yours are better than mine, Birch.
It's definitely like this corner of Michigan, or this bottom half of Michigan was hugely populated with factories of all kinds, and then all of the stuff that you'd need for all these factories, right? Like tons of tool and die shops and machine shops and prototyping shops and, supplier facilities to like make materials that would go into the factories. And so it's been, kind of a sad thing to watch over time as stuff starts to leave this area. And like you said, I think one day I sent you some stuff, Birch, right from Craigslist. I pulled it open and typed Bridgeport into Craigslist, and
it was amazing and sad for me.
There's a lot of equipment here, and a lot of it's old, right? It dates back to World War II era, Korean War era, all kinds of stuff. So,
but it's at the detriment of a lot of factories going down. And you've told me about driving through Pontiac and how kind of sad it is to see that become what it is now.
It is, yeah. Yeah. The city of Pontiac itself, has kind of decayed to a point that it's not a great place to be. The city of Detroit itself, the downtown area, the main downtown area has had a significant revival in the last several years, but there's huge neighborhood areas that, I had I guess she would be considered a great, great aunt that had a house in Detroit. And when she passed, I didn't know her, but my grandfather did. And he grabbed me one day and said, "Hey, come on, help me. I got to go take care of this lady's house." And, we drive through this neighborhood that was very, very depressed. And every one of these houses were massive with huge amounts of detailed woodwork and brick. And, these places were mansions for rich people once upon a time. And there were just blocks after blocks after blocks after blocks of these places. And, when I went into this house with my grandfather, that was the thing that just blew me away. Crazy spiral staircases of oak and all kinds of stuff. And, all that stuff has kind of, decayed to the point that most of it's uninhabitable in many of those neighborhoods or been burned down or other stuff. So it is pretty sad to see.
I think you're going to see that in about any city that started, around the turn of the century, these beautiful tradesmen and craftsman type houses that had this just beautiful woodwork. There was a lot of love put into them. And unfortunately, they get kind of run down. But like here in Springfield, we're seeing a lot of those areas start to pick up again, and they're getting, revitalized and rebuilt, which is pretty nice. Nice to see.
Yeah.
So we know that you like to collect things. So
right.
What was one of the first things that you started to collect?
Probably guitar stuff. I mean, I didn't really collect guitars until I was out of college, because like everybody else, I didn't have any money. I sold my guitar I had when I was in high school to try to help pay for school. And that was kind of my promise to myself when I got done with college, I'd go get a good guitar. And so I played when I was growing up. My mom had me playing piano when I was real young. She was a piano person and she thought I had an ear for music. And so I did some piano when I was younger, and then I wanted to play music that I liked, not piano music. And so I decided I wanted to play guitar. And so I did that. Like I said, got rid of my stuff when I went to college. And then after I bought a couple nice guitars and played, and that was kind of probably the first thing I really collected per se. I always had a strong love for motorcycle stuff. My father and I had dirt bikes when I was young. That was a very classic old school thing. Hey, Dad, I want a dirt bike. And he said, yeah, that's great. You need money for a dirt bike. I'm not buying you one. I don't have money to buy you one. So that doesn't work. And so I said, okay, well, how do I make money? And he said, you can work next door at the farm. I'll give you special projects at home, and you can start earning money that way. And if it's something you really want, you can save up for it. And so I had that cycle several times as a young guy, and eventually saved up some money and bought a dirt bike. And then that was a funny excuse for my dad. Hey, he can't go by himself. He's going to get hurt. I better get one too, which my mom hates motorcycles. So that was kind of a funny twist. But anyway, we did motorcycles when I was young, and same thing there. Once I got older, I got big into the motorcycle thing and launched off into the world of Ducati. That was always a thing that had my interest. And, like knives, it kind of spiraled into a craziness. But yeah, guitars and motorcycles, I like them both.
And that's how you got like your screen name, because I was confused for a long time by what the hell your screen name used to be on the forums back in the day.
Right. Yeah, Desmodromic, which is the Desmodromic valve system is what a Ducati uses. So instead of having a camshaft that pushes a valve open and then a valve spring that pushes the valve closed when the camshaft passes by, the Ducati intake and cam system uses actually a captured setup. So there's a lobe that pushes the valve open, and then a separate lobe with a separate set of followers that actually pulls the valve closed. And as you might imagine, that creates a very delicate balance from a mechanical system perspective. If things start to wear out, the valve can float around where it shouldn't. And if it's too tight, the thing kind of wants to rip itself apart. So Ducati started doing that, I don't even know when, 40s or 50s, a long, long time ago. And they did it because they could, if you hear people talk about valve float in a regular engine, that's when the engine starts to spin so fast that the valves can't close fast enough. The springs aren't strong enough to get the valves closed. And Ducatis weren't limited by that because they used this system that actually slammed the valve shut. And so they could run very radical cam profiles because of this very complex and some would argue today archaic mechanical system, but very unique thing. So that's where Desmodromic comes from.
Now, it
means under control in both directions or in a circuit.
Is that sort of like, hemispheric? Is that like what they call that type of engine, a Desmodromic engine, or is that just the name?
Yeah. I think on Ducati motorcycles for many years, they actually had a little sticker somewhere in little letters that said Desmodromic. And that was the big difference with those engines on those motorcycles. They were V twins, so they had a 2-cylinder in a V like a Harley, but they used this captured valve system.
It sounds like a really badass knife name, kind of like hydrostatic. But I'm not about to get sued.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they own a trademark on it or not, but it's definitely been their thing for a long, long time.
Sean, you name one of yours and we'll see what happens.
Oh, dude, that don't play to my crowd at all. They expect something way goofier than that.
Much doomier.
Doom.
Demondronic.
Doomodronic. That'll work. Doomodronic.
Doomo. Oh, now we're talking.
I digress.
So Mark, what got you interested in knives? How did that happen?
Well, so I mentioned my grandfather earlier. He was a very strong influence on me as a young man. He actually became like a purchasing guy for General Motors. So he was more on the management side of things, but he was and I'm probably remembering him fondly more so, but he was my grandfather, right? So that's what I do.
Right.
I considered him like a gentleman, right? He was sort of like a outdoorsy gentleman, and he was always very well spoken, and he always seemed to really have himself together. And he'd go out west elk hunting, and he did a bunch of different things. And so I always thought he was a very cool guy, and he sort of impressed on me at a young age that a proper man has a watch, a pocket knife, and a handkerchief. And I've never been a handkerchief guy for whatever reason. I've never been able to get into that. But so he was kind of one of the forces that kind of got me into the knife thing a little bit as a young guy. But really, it wasn't ever. He always had a slip joint. I actually have a couple of the slip joints that he carried around for years and years and years. I mentioned in an earlier episode, right? They're sharpened down to a little nub.
Right.
They've probably filleted 1,000 fish and all kinds of stuff, right? In their life. But, so yeah, it was really started there and in Boy Scouts, right? I had a Boy Scout knife that I carried for, gosh, I don't know how many years. And then, it wasn't really part of my, older, like teenage guy, college era kind of stuff. But then later on, kind of after a round or two of motorcycle, guitar kind of stuff, I ended up getting involved in competitive shooting. So I was very active with USPSA as an action pistol shooter, sort of like drag racing against the clock with a pistol. And I got way into that. And when I got into the shooting thing, one of my friends said, hey, if you're going to shoot a lot, you really should reload. And so I bought a reloading press. And at the time, anyway, the way you would go buy powder and primers and other stuff is you'd go to the gun show. So I started going to the gun show with my buddy, Steve. And at the gun show one time, he said, oh, hey, check this knife out. And, we were looking at knives, and it was a Benchmade Emerson CQC7. And I said, oh, I really like that. That's cool. So I bought this Benchmade CQC7, and I bought a Pardue Auto and some other stuff over the course of several months, and kind of got back into the habit of having a knife in my pocket. And so I carried those knives a lot, used them a lot when I was doing the shooting thing. And then a bit later, somehow or another, I don't even know how I ended up touching the flashlight world, but I did the flashlight thing for a little while. This is a bunch of years ago now. And through the whole like titanium flashlight, custom flashlight kind of scene, one of the guys that I knew through that had this knife, and I saw a picture of it, and it was a custom ground Strider. And I'm like, whoa, that thing's kind of crazy looking. It was probably a Nightmare Grind or something. And he goes, oh yeah, this is, these Strider knives. There's places where you can buy these things. So I was asking him, how do I get one? Where does this come from? Tell me about it. And, so he was the guy that actually introduced me to the USN. I don't think he's been around for many, many years. I think he sort of dropped out of the scene, but he got me started on USN. And, once I got to the USN, it all sort of exploded from there.
Yeah, the USN is a really cool place. It was pretty formative in, I think, most of our early career and getting into the hobby and stuff. One thing you mentioned, lights. I don't know if you've been much aware of the lights lately, but well, I know you have because we've talked about center lights, but
Yep.
the LED has totally revolutionized custom lights.
Right.
I mean, I can remember 20 years ago, you'd be like, wow, this thing has like 60 lumens.
Right.
And you'd like walk around and shine it in people's eyes.
Right.
And now if they don't have 600 lumens, it's not even interesting, it seems like.
I remember when one of the first LED lights came out, I got to test it when I was still working at Bass Pro, and it was not one we ever carried or anything like that. And I still have it around, but it had like 10 LEDs, and it wasn't that bright, but and I tested, it went for 30 hours. That was the big thing then, the fact that it could go for so long, and still have light. And it was amazing, and then it just kind of blew up after that.
Right.
Yeah.
They were playing it as an efficiency thing initially instead of a power thing.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I also didn't know you were into competitive shooting. That's really interesting, Mark. Do you still shoot?
I haven't in a while. I mean, I'll go shoot on occasion just to kind of try to halfway, I would say, keep up my skill would be a bad way to say it. I certainly don't shoot that much. I used to shoot a ton. So no, not like I used to. In our old house, I had a dedicated reloading area, and I still have a Dillon 1050. So, I mean, I can still reload at a very, very high rate.
Rounds.
Yeah. So, but I don't have a reloading bench at the house that we're at now. And so, I kind of got out of it, and I'm still a USPSA Life member, and I still have all my stuff from when I did all that. I used to travel a lot. That was, it's kind of an interesting parallel to the knife show kind of scene. The competitive shooting thing for me was very much the same way, where we would shoot local matches. In Michigan, at the time that I was into it, where I live in Michigan, there were places to shoot, but not like I could shoot 2 or 3 weekends a month. But if I wanted to shoot a third weekend a month, I had to drive a decent distance to get to that match. But yeah, that's basically what I did. I shot at least 2 weekends a month, and I probably went to practice 2 or 3 times a week. So, I mean, I was shooting a lot of rounds, and it was very fun. As an engineer, it was an awesome hobby to be involved in because I loved the ability to reload to try to maximize how fast I could go and still meet the rules for power. So that was really fun to do load development stuff. I did a lot of that. I worked with a local gunsmith friend, and we designed some funky new different compensator designs for some open gun stuff, like race guns with dots and comps and high capacity, all that stuff. And so one of the guns has a very cool titanium compensator. So it's a big, crazy ray gun looking thing, but with a comp that's super, super light. So it points real fast. But yeah, it was very fun. I shot the limited nationals, USPSA limited nationals down in Virginia one year. That was really cool. I used to travel Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, Illinois, a bunch of different places to go shoot regional matches. So like I said, that was the interesting, parallel to the knife kind of world with shows. It's a very similar thing. Just like I used to drag race with a guy that I worked with, and drag racing was the same way. You'd go to some competition somewhere, and they'd be the same people that were at the thing last weekend, right, in a different part of the country. this little tribal thing that kind of moves around and has the same kind of interest in a topic, whether it's knives or shooting or drag racing or whatever. And so it was very cool. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
There used to be a show. There was before, I don't even know what they call it today, but there used to be a cable network called TNN.
The Nashville Network?
The Nashville Network.
It's Spike TV now. Yeah, it became Spike TV.
Interesting. So the Nashville Network used to have a show called American Shooter.
With Jim Scouten.
It was hosted with Jim Scouten, yeah. And I actually that was my 15 seconds of fame, I was on American Shooter at a shooting competition once, which was very cool. It was this, it was a shooting match that Smith & Wesson put on out in Phoenix, Arizona area, Mesa, Arizona, really, called the Smith & Wesson Pro-Am. And this was a match where they had an amateur match, which is what I shot in because I was just a regular guy. And then they had a pro match. And then they had a special version of the match where the winner of the amateur match got to shoot with the pros, like guys they could, like Rob Latham and Brian Enos and all those guys.
Yeah.
And so I actually, kind of unbelievably, kid from nowhere story, ended up winning the amateur match. So, I got to shoot with all those guys that are professional shooters. And, that was kind of a recurring thing each year for a little while on American Shooters. So I got to shoot on the Nashville Network back in the day. That was
I believe
cool.
I may have seen that. I used to record that on the VCR and watch it.
Right.
Now, if you saw it, did he drive up in this drag Camaro, guitars in the back, red mullet flowing behind him,
cranking out the Motley Crue?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nice.
No, it was kind of funny because the cool part was that I got to be on this show. That was really fun. And shoot with some crazy, awesome, the best shooters in the world to this day kind of guys, right?
Oh yeah.
Rob Latham and those guys they're legendary. So that was a really fun opportunity to get to shoot with those guys. The downside was the previous year at the Smith & Wesson Pro-Am, the guy that won the amateur match actually ended up winning against the pros. Oh. So it was an awesome TV thing because it was super kid from nowhere thing, right? And so in my case, it was I got into this match and then all the footage that made it onto TV was me getting my ass kicked by these pros, which is what should have happened, but it was still pretty funny.
It'd still be fun. I think I'd still be talking about it a lot. If that happened to me, it'd be like, oh, did I tell you about the time?
Anytime I sat at a bar, I'd be like, let me tell you about the time.
There you go. It was a fun experience. There was a test track there, a GM test facility in Yuma, Arizona, it was in Mesa. So it wasn't very far from where that range was. And, it was nice because I used to travel there a lot for work stuff and I would bring all my pistol stuff with me and I'd shoot competition shooting in the evenings or whatever, or if I was there over a weekend, and where I lived, I could shoot 2, maybe 3 matches a month in the Phoenix area. They have a crazy active competitive shooting scene. So when I was there, if I wanted to, I could shoot 5 nights a week. It was it was crazy.
All right. What does that sound?
I don't know.
Am I the only one that's hearing that?
Sound like somebody was saying
it sounds like somebody's saying
No, I heard it sounded like a pencil on paper.
Yeah. Are you writing
that? May have been me doodling. Sorry. I was just doodling. I put it down. Sorry, I didn't know it was making noise.
I was like,
no touchy, Tom.
I didn't know if someone was writing a story or just cutting something.
Taking notes, man. Taking notes on where the shooting scene's hot. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
He just added some stuff to his bucket list. Get on TNN.
Shoot with Jerry and Rob.
There you go.
Step 1, bring back TNN.
It's a long game, Sean.
Well, man. Any plan worth having is.
Right.
So how long were you on USN? Were you before the
great server crash?
Before the crash?
No.
Or was it you started after that?
Yeah, I started after that. I joined USN in 2008.
Was that when was that crash? AUT4 or something? Or
yeah.
AUT4.
When you talk about a crash or something, having the patch, you got to use the AUT.
AUT4.
It's like a rule or something.
Right.
Well, what were you interested in when you got on USN at first? I mean, tell us about
what you were collecting when
knives
were still green.
Yeah.
What was your first custom purchase? That's what I want to know right now.
First, boy, that's a really good question. I guess I'm not sure what my first real custom was. The first time I spent enough money on a knife that it made me sweat was when I bought a Sebenza. I bought a Strider fairly early on because that was one of the things that got my attention was the, crazy mixed Strider custom grind thing got my attention initially. I ended up buying a Sebenza. That felt like I was spending a great deal of money. I bought some Hinderer stuff, so I kind of got into Rick's thing for a while. And what was my first custom? It might have been a Hinderer custom, but I don't think so. I know it wasn't an Emerson because I didn't get into that until later. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'll have to go back. Much to Michael's surprise, I'm sure I have a bunch of notes on this stuff. I'd actually dig them out and
That's awesome.
figure that out.
It's in a spreadsheet. So you may not have known what your first custom was back then. What was your, I guess, grail? What were you looking at then that you were just like, wow, that's the stuff that I'd like to buy, but I'm just into it and it's kind of crazy. Because we all started that progressive type of purchasing of,
Oh yeah.
$60 is a bit to pay, and then $150, and then $300, and then now we're, gets into crazy land a little bit. So what were you looking at then that you would love to have bought?
I think that the whole Emerson thing for me was what's the right way to put it? An aspirational thing. I didn't have a custom Emerson until a fair bit later, but that was something that I always thought was cool. And probably part of that came from the perspective and the USN perspective on knives. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it used to be such a strongly Emerson focused place. And
that's what it all started about, was Emerson knives.
Mm-hmm.
He was the usual suspect.
So for me, I think one of the things that I've quickly figured out when I got to USN was that it was this insane collection of information and people. And the fact that if I was willing to spend a little bit of time and I liked this aspect of it, I could go dig up almost any topic that I wanted to know something more about, and sometimes discover new topics that I didn't even know I was interested about until I started to read about them. It was sort of like this bottomless pit of information, and I really appreciated that piece of it. And I frankly miss the fact that lots of people don't use it as much anymore, right? And most of it's still there, but I think that was what really got my attention. So I was very much in a discovery phase, I guess, Michael, where I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted. And I had the same experience when I was doing the guitar thing where, we had guitar stores in the Detroit area, but there was lots of fancy amplifiers and guitars that were hand-built guitars and amplifiers where people were building these things from scratch. They were very boutique kind of music equipment. And none of those things were available in the Detroit area. So if I wanted to play one or hear one or try it out, like I read about it in a guitar magazine or I saw it on a guitar forum or message board and someone's going on and on about how fantastic it is, the only way I could figure it out is to buy one. And so I would say for me, that was a big piece of my early time at USN was, someone says, oh, a Sebenza's a great knife. Okay, well, they don't have Sebenzas at my Ace Hardware, right? And this is before I started doing the show thing. So I'd never seen a Sebenza before until I went and actually bought one.
Yeah.
And realized, oh, this is pretty cool, right? Super smooth. I really like that. Super solid. I really like that. Fits my pocket. That's cool. Kind of plain looking, but there's some kind of elegance in that too. So, for me, it was sort of work my way through some gear to be able to get exposure to it. And,
I think some of that search and discovery is some of the more exciting parts of it. When you don't know what you want, you know what you like, and you pick pieces from each one and you keep looking and keep, as soon as you open one door, you find more doors to open, as far as when it comes to knives and the how far you can go down that hole. Now I think Tom is assembling a gun back there. We know it's you, Tom.
He's using the clicky keyboard.
Just Googling. I just pulled up the USN. Come on.
So what did you start? I guess, you went from Sebenzas. I know you collected Emersons, and you've got a very impressive, cool Emerson collection still. When did you start hitting some of the custom stuff? Or other custom stuff, I guess. I know you got in the Hinderers quite a bit.
for me, the big eye opener was when I went to my first USN get together, because again, it was like, I was struggling to kind of talk myself into this threshold of I'm going to buy a $300 knife, right? Or $350 knife. And I'm sort of like, oh my God, am I going to spend $350 on a knife? That's insane. And then I went to a get together down in Indiana with our friend Joe Castle. Cubby. It was at Cubby's house.
Right.
And I'd never been to a USN function before. I'd never been to a show. I didn't know anything about it. And so it was a really funny exchange with Amy because she's like, "You're going where?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm driving just across the border into Indiana to go to this knife guy sort of hangout thing." And she's like, "Well, where is it? Is it at like a convention center thing? Or like, what are we talking about?" I'm like, "No, it's at his house." She's like, "Oh, so you're driving to some guy you've never met. You're driving to his house in some place you don't know in
to
Indiana,
hang out with a bunch of dudes you don't know.
Exactly.
That you met on the internet.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it seemed super sketchy to her. It seemed a little weird to me, but I'm like, I should do this. It seems cool. So I went to Joe's place and,
he was a super good dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was, the very classic light bulb goes on kind of situation, right? Like I show up at Joe's house. I don't know anybody. I walk in. They don't know me. Right. And okay, I brought a couple of knives that I had at the time, but I didn't have anything that I think was cool to sort of show off. But I show up at Joe's house. He was super, super welcoming. So was his wife. They're very nice folks. I met some great people there. That's actually, one of the guys that has a ton of Sean's early fixed blade stuff, Pete.
The Pete.
First time I met Pete was at Joe's place. I met, and so I was there at Joe's. I'm looking at knives. All these guys had knives laying out on the table. And so Pete was there and he's got Sean's fixed blades. And I'm like, whoa, look at those things, man. These are like big knives compared to what I was typically carrying around, right? I was like a 3-inch knife kind of dude, right? I mean, 3.5-inch or 4-inch knife folder for me was a huge knife because I wasn't used to carrying big knives. And so there was these, what to me seemed like big giant fixed blades. And I'm like, wow, those things are gnarly. And I've never seen anything like that before. That's pretty cool. And one of the guys there was Dave Moon, Big Wave Dave.
Oh yeah.
Shout out to Dave.
And, I didn't know who he was. He says, "Hey, my name's Dave." And we're sort of talking for a little bit. And I told him this is the first time I'd ever come to a USN related thing. And he was like super classic suspect guy, right? Like super welcoming and nice and helpful and answering a bunch of questions. And he pulls out, I don't know if he had a Ray bag at the time or if he just had some other kind of bag that had a bunch of, little knife tacos in it or what, but he starts pulling knives out and he goes, "Oh, have you ever seen one of these before?" And I'm like, "No, but this is amazing. What is this?" He goes, "Oh, that's a Tom Mayo." I'm like, "Holy shit, I've never seen a Mayo in person before. This is super cool." So I'm like marveling at how smooth this knife is. It's super cool. He goes, "Oh yeah, it's like now a low magnetic signature thing. It's got a 6K blade, right? It's called Covert." I'm like, "Wow, that's badass, man. That's really, really cool." He pulls out another knife. "Oh, you ever seen one of these before?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I have a Benchmade that looks like that." He goes, "Yeah, this is a CQC7 custom, and it's a zero grind." And he's explaining all kinds of stuff to me. So he went through a whole bunch of custom knives that he had in his bag. And I was just absolutely blown away by that because it was like fireworks going off in my head, right? Like, whoa, these custom knives are super, super cool. So that's what got my attention on the custom side of things. And, and that stuff Dave had in his bag was sort of the definition of cool at the time.
Still is.
Right? And still is for me. I mean, I still love all that stuff.
It seems like that's something that happened a lot, a lot of the gatherings or, get-togethers or shows and stuff where a lot of guys were very accommodating to new guys coming in, and being nice and leading people around and saying, "Hey, this is so-and-so." And I think sometimes we kind of forget about that when it comes to new people to us, and we need to keep that in mind that everyone's new at some point, and lead them around, show them, welcome them.
Absolutely. Yeah. It impressed me a great deal. Just the whole, patience with questions and sort of sort of showing me a little bit of a path about the knives and a little bit about the people. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, realistically for me at the time, people like Joe or Dave, these were very much like very quickly like role model kind of things, right? Like, wow, this dude invited a bunch of people inside his house, right? That's pretty cool. That's neat.
Strangers.
And, you know, here's this, right. Here's this guy, Dave, who had, you know, many very, very cool knives in this bag. And, you know, he could be hanging with his buddies, but he's standing there with me, teaching me why these are cool or why he likes them. And, that impressed me a great deal. So like you said, I've tried to do that with other people whenever I can. You know, I think we can all do a better job of that. I continue to try to be a better person every day. Right. But I've had some fun experiences, a little bit on the opposite side of that, right? Like where we'll have a local, like a Michigan get together or something, and someone will show up and they've never been to something like that before. And I'm like, dude, I was you. I know what you're going through, right? This seems crazy. And I take them around and introduce them to every person in the room and start showing them knives, some of them mine, some of them that belong to other people that are there. And I think that's super fun. And, it's sort of a way to give back a little bit to that kind of scene that taught me all those things.
Well, didn't you have a similar experience at your first show where someone kind of took you in and introduced you to a lot of people? And
I did. Yeah. At the first Blade show I went to, my son Ryan came with me, and I'd never been to Blade show before. I'd never really been to a knife show before until I went to Blade. I mean, I went to the local gun and knife show, you know, where they had productions and Chinese AKs and whatever, but I'd never been to like a real knife show, big custom knife show. And so my son and I, you know, I'm like, hey man, you want to go to Blade show? I've never been there before. We got to drive to Atlanta. So we got in the car, we drove to Atlanta from Michigan and showed up at Blade show. And, we're standing around in the pit because I knew that I had read enough to know that was the place to hang out. And so we're sort of standing there in the pit, and there's, you know, 1,000 people or whatever drinking and hanging out and chit chatting, and they all know one another, and we kind of don't know anybody. And so we talked to a couple people, but, you know, it was sort of like we didn't have any connections in the crowd. We didn't really know anybody that was there. And a guy walked up to me and said, hey, you know, what's your name? And I told him my name and introduced my son. And we had a little conversation, and he's like, hey, come with me. I'm going to introduce you to some people. And that guy was Tom Monahan. And Tom grabbed me and took me around, introduced me to Mayo, which blew my mind, introduced me a bunch of other knife makers, introduced me a whole bunch of suspects, a bunch of other people and personalities and friends of his. And he probably spent an hour and a half with us, taking us around and meeting people and just kind of introducing us to the scene. And, you know, I appreciate Tom to this day for that fact that he invested his time in a couple people he'd never seen before. And that was very, very cool. It can
be very overwhelming. You know, it's almost like you're at a junior high dance or something. You know, everyone's all grouped together and, rationally you're a grown ass man, but you're still like, oh, this is kind of awkward.
Right.
I don't know anybody.
It can still be overwhelming.
Oh, consistently. Hell yeah.
I mean, you walk downstairs and everybody's grouped up. It's like, oh, hey, what's up, guys? It's much better now. I mean, that we know people, but I still think it can be overwhelming, and I think it's interesting. I think because of the way you were received, it really sounds like it made a big difference.
It did. It made a huge difference for me because, like I said, it impressed me. It, you know, not like impressed me. Oh, I think you're cool. It impressed me. Like it left an impression upon me. Like this is really interesting, right? I appreciated the idea that someone would do that. And so
then there's, it's good people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's good. It's always fun to have a hobby, but when you go and you actually see that there's good people there, it makes it so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, what shows do you enjoy doing now?
That's a good question. What shows? I typically for the last few or several years have gone to 5 or 6 shows, I think. So I usually go to you with TKI under mild duress. Fun show. It used to be short. It's been very interesting going with you, Michael, as like working on that side of the table to see the opposite side of not opposite side, but a very different perspective where I'm not there to buy. And until this year, I had never gone as a buyer. And that was a very interesting, eye-opening thing.
The opposite side.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's definitely different to be on that side, and it's, so, I mean, what do you like about the shows, and what do you, I guess, dislike about them?
Well, like Tom said, going to a bunch for some period of time, it becomes very quickly something where I as much look forward to the people as anything. And I've kind of gotten to a point with collecting where when I get to a show, the question, the starter question between most human beings at the knife show is, oh, what do you hear? What are you chasing this weekend? Or what are you trying to buy? Or what are you after? And for me, it's not usually anything specific, or if it is, I've already got it kind of figured out, or, it's as cliche as it has become to say, I don't really go at this point for knives as much as I do to see people. And yes, I get into some specific lotteries for some very specific things that I would like to have or enjoy for a little while, or maybe keep it long haul. But for me, it's as much about the people and the experience, and getting to see my friends, because like yep. Tom said, there are some really wonderful people. I mean, like all parts of life, there are some people that maybe aren't my favorite people too, but for the most part, the people I choose to spend my time with are people that I really enjoy and appreciate as human beings and as people. And that's truly pleasurable, right? That's really for real when I see people that they're people that I actually have a real relationship with, right? Not just like I see your name every day on the screen on Facebook or on USN or wherever. They're like people that you actually know. And, it's cool. It's a reunion thing.
People you talk to on the phone, and have real questions and real talks with.
Right.
So TKI.
So TKI with Michael, I used to go for a while I went to both New York shows, both the fall show and the March show.
Right.
The March.
I don't think they do the March show anymore, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So now that's in Fort Lauderdale. Was in Miami, I think, the first one they did. Now it's in Fort Lauderdale. So we went to the Fort Lauderdale show last year. Our friends Ron and Sarah came with us. Amy came with. We had a wonderful time. It was just a very nice place to be, right? The hotel is super nice. The show is super small. And we had lots of stuff to do in the evening because it's gorgeous there, right? So Fort Lauderdale show is super, super fun. So we're very much looking forward to going That's coming up in March here, middle of March. So Fort Lauderdale show, because Amy likes to go, I think is sort of, as long as they're going to keep doing that, I think we're going to go because we have a great time at that.
Right.
And then the next one is Blade Show. And my friend Ron Smith and I end up making we drive down every year, which we probably shouldn't because it's a really, really long drive from Michigan, but we drive down every year and it becomes this adventure thing. So that's kind of fun. So
how many hours is that drive?
Between fuel, food, Ron taking pictures, breaks, it's like I don't know, 10 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, by Tom Crine adventure standards, it's not that far, but for me, it's a long drive. So I usually try to borrow a cool car from work and have something comfortable or fun to drive down in, and Ron loves that, and we have a good time. So
Ben still talks about you letting him start the Stingray.
Yeah. That's fun stuff, man. That's the job that I have now is very fun. We get to work on some great cars and some performance car stuff, and that's super enjoyable. And seeing people get excited about it is part of what makes it fun. So seeing your son light up was pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
So
what is... Oh, go ahead.
I saw Blade Show, and then, what's the next one I go to?
Gathering.
Gathering. Yep. Gathering out in Vegas. Awesome show. And then the New York show in November. I skipped it for a year or two. But I went back this past year. Had a great time.
Saw you this year.
Yep. Always enjoy going over into the city at night and hanging out. Fantastic places to eat. So that's a fun time. My son he's come a couple times to the New York show. He really likes that. And he likes the whole go explore the city adventure thing. He gets a kick out of that. So, if he wants to go again this year, he'll probably come with me again. And then, they've been doing this, Kentucky show has kind of started to really, I think, hit its stride a little bit. I mean, this year it was pretty notably large. Would you
Right.
agree, Sean?
Oh, wholeheartedly. Yeah.
Yeah. So that show's got a whole bunch of makers. It's a fun time. Again, the same kind of group of people. And the nice part about that one is just like the New York show gets the East Coast guys that don't travel, and the Vegas show gets the West Coast guys that don't travel too far. The Kentucky show hits sort of the middle of the country guys who, there's like a little bit of a mixture. There's a core that's the same people that are at every show, and then a bunch of people that are local. That makes it kind of fun. So
Yeah, we saw a lot of new faces at the show this year. I think that show was a first show for quite a few people.
I agree. I talked to a whole bunch of people at the show, kind of wandering around, just trying to do that same thing, right? Like, hey, that guy looks kind of lost, and just go say, hey man, how's it going? And strike up a little bit of a conversation. And yeah, I had the same impression, Sean. Lots of new people this year at Kentucky.
Yeah, man, it just blows me away, thinking about the first year we did that, and it was like, I don't know, 10 or 15 people at a Chinese buffet. And
Right.
now it is what it is.
Right.
So
So, yeah.
interesting.
Go ahead, Michael.
No, I was going to say that now we have, like I was going to ask, how does Amy enjoy the shows? Because that's kind of been neat to see. A lot more wives and girlfriends and whatnot have been coming to the shows, and they've started connected with other wives and, whatnot. And I think start to look forward to seeing, which is, it's great to see, because it used to be just kind of a lot of dudes kind of hanging out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think she would be interested in the York show. I think she'll come to that sometime, because there's stuff to do outside the show. But like you pointed out just now, the interesting thing is to see her get to know the crowd as well. And, the first time we went to the gathering, she comes to the gathering with me each year. So she comes to the gathering. If I go to Kentucky, she's come to Kentucky with me. And then she likes this Fort Lauderdale show, because who wouldn't want to get out of Michigan in March, right? And go somewhere warm. So she comes to those shows, and she came to the gathering. That was the first time she really came to a knife show. And I think it was very eye-opening for her, and it helped her understand what I like about it. Because, her impression is, oh, wow, I walk into this room and it's a bunch of dudes, and they have lots of crazy looking jewelry on, and they, some of them are kind of rough looking guys, and, like this, she sees this whole scene, and then I introduce her to people, and, here's a person that she might not have walked up to and talked to just because, it's not a person that she would normally deal with in her life, right? Like, she works at a medical facility, and so, it's different walk of life kind of people, and I'm introducing her to them, and she's like, oh my gosh, after we walk away, that person was super, super nice. I'm like, yeah, how about that? And, so for her, watching her, with her, just like with a new person who comes to shows or to get-togethers or whatever, and watching her realize, oh, there's a lot of really cool and awesome people here. And I'm like, yeah, that's why I like to come. I mean, I wouldn't like to come if it was a bunch of douchebags. I wouldn't be here. I'm here because these are my friends, and these are people that I admire, and these are people that I respect, and these are people that I enjoy talking with. And, she can see that very quickly. And so I think that helps. You want, like at the Vegas show, she likes to come to the show and then go to the pool or go hang out or whatever. And she does the same thing in Florida. She'll come to the show for a little while and then take off. But, but I think it's because she's gotten more comfortable and more familiar with people, and you know what I mean? She knows the folks a little better. So it's been a fun thing.
Very nice.
Are we having a train experience, Tom?
Yeah.
It was either that or an Oregon coming through there.
That'd
Sean
be the
fired
train.
up. Sean fired up the organ in the background.
Yeah. Had a very doomy sound to it.
Like the Phantom of the Opera.
There you go.
So what do you collect now? What do you? I know there's not a lot of stuff you specifically after, because I think for guys that have been around for a bit like you, I think that that sometimes that can cause heartache. If you have your eyes set on a specific knife, unless you have just tons of money to throw at it, you kind of got to have an attitude of get what you can get, don't throw a fit, sort of thing.
Well, wow, I like that. Was that like a Jesse Jackson kind of rhyme?
It's like
I believe that's something I think that's something I tell my kids.
that's a
I like that.
Birchism. Well,
You know what I mean?
Dropping the wisdom.
It's if you go to a show and you're like, I want this knife right here, and you don't, unless you have a ton of money to throw for, whoever gets it in lottery, then it's going to be tough.
Right. Yeah. So for me, I think you have to, I don't go really after a very specific thing, and I have some stuff that I collect. I mean, for today, I have some older Emerson folders, some usually waveless is my strong preference, usually with thin liners, which is kind of an old school Emerson thing. So I haven't bought a new Emerson in a long time, a newer one, just because I prefer these older pieces. And so those are sort of a go find it on a dealer's table kind of thing. And lots of times I'm not interested in spending crazy money on something. So I don't buy so much of those anymore. Typically at a show, when I go these days, it's, I'll go find specific makers that I'm interested in, or if I saw that there's going to be a piece at the show that I'd like to have a chance at, I'll go enter a lottery or bid on a piece. But most of the time it's, this is going to sound funny, right? But I'll go in on Michael's pieces. I'm usually in Tom's lottery. If Sean's there, I'm in Sean's lottery. If Jerry's there, I'm usually in Jerry's lottery. So there's usually some pretty specific makers that, I'd be happy with anything they have on the table. From a collecting perspective, those pieces aren't usually, for me, what I think of as collector pieces as much as, hey, that's a cool piece, I'd like to carry that. For me, some years ago, I kind of started down this path of collecting, maybe in a slightly weird way, where the first thing I did it with was this Stellite Core Damascus.
I was going to mention you kind of did like sub collections.
Yeah, so I decided, hey, a fun thing to do in my head was this idea that I would kind of pick a material, and if I could find enough of that material and find makers that were willing to use it, maybe I would, try to get knives built with specific materials. And so I did it with this Stellite Core Damascus. And so I think probably the first piece was that first piece that Birch built for me, which was what was that, Michael? Was that
Impetus, I believe. No. It was a tangent.
No, it was a tangent. Yeah. So it was a tangent flipper. It used this Stellite Core, super cool piece. Tom, you built me an Alpha that used that Stellite Core stuff. Gus Cicchini, I gave him a decent sized chunk of it. He built me, I think the Integral that he built for me was using that material, which was really cool. And then he had a little piece left, and he made one of his little teeny tiny 3-finger flippers, or whatever he calls it, his super small knife, before he was doing the hook bottle opener thing, but a little teeny guy, little tiny flipper. So that was kind of cool because he was able to squeeze that out of there as well. So that actually ended up being 2 from Gus. And I'm trying to think who else. John Graham made me a flipper, kind of one of his Warncliffe kind of things with some Mokuta handles and that same stellite core. And so that was fun, but that material was hard to get. You couldn't, you know what I mean? There wasn't a supply of it. Chad only made a little bit of it, and then you kind of go for a while and then make a little bit more. So I still have all those knives, those stellite core knives. So that's like a little kind of pocket of a collection that for me was really fun because it's pieces that are focused on this material, right? And they're each maker kind of doing their thing with it. And if you put them together, you can see that they have the same blade material, but what each guy did, well, I guess I don't have, there's one of them I don't have. I don't have Michael's piece that he made for me out of that stuff. But if you put all those pieces together, you'd see it's the same blade material, but they're very different from one another. And seeing that contrast, I thought was very, very fun and interesting.
Right. Well, you kept the good ones.
Oh. Now, if I remember correctly, wasn't mine a lottery win? Or am I wrong on that one?
The stellite core piece?
Yeah. For some reason, I thought that was a lottery win. Like the only lottery I think you've won of mine.
I don't think so.
Was it delivery? Because I remember it was at the gathering.
It was it was before the gathering. It was during that summer before that you built it for me.
Huh.
Or finished it anyway. And I brought it to the gathering.
Maybe that's it. I remember something about the gathering, but that's about all.
Yep. I had it at that gathering.
I gotcha.
And you've kind of got another one going now, right?
I do. So, I've actually done it with a couple different things. But the thing I've been working on, and this is one of those, long game kind of things, right? I've been working with these Westinghouse knives for, I don't know, probably 3 years, 4 years, maybe more than that. Where, okay, I decided I like this Westinghouse antique ivory. It's sort of like the thing now, right? Lots and lots of people like it. It's become this super desirable thing. But it was the same sort of way. Like, okay, I have some Westinghouse, right? At one point, Jody had some, and I bought a bunch, and it became the same thing. Like, hey, I want to use this handle material, and I had kind of orders or whatever with a bunch of people, or, was able to get knives made from different folks using this same handle material. And in each case, it was each guy's own thing. And it's the same deal, right? It's been really fun because if I put all those knives together, yeah, they all have Westinghouse somewhere on them. But like on the knife that Gus made for me, it's one of those, I think I had it in my hand during one of the earlier episodes. It's that hidden tab flipper thing that he does, right? The SLT flipper. His is an inlay. Sean built me this Chronomancer knife that he designed that has Westinghouse handles, but that was sort of a unique pattern. I think that was the first one that Sean made of that design.
That's still the only one I've made of the full-size Chronomancer, period.
Is it?
Yeah.
And it's a cool piece. It was, he and I talked about it. It's sort of most of them have been sort of exactly what people think of a custom knife would be, right? Like in that case, Sean and I talked a bunch about it. And, he started asking, well, what kind of blade shapes do you like? What do you like? Do you have something in your head on what you think you want to do? And so he designed this Chronomancer kind of based on a discussion about a blade that had a bunch of belly and a big sweep to the blade. And that's exactly kind of what came out of it. And, it ended up with Westinghouse handles on it. And, that's Sean's piece that's in that little Westinghouse collection. So I think today I probably have 15 or 16.
Oh, very cool.
Maybe not that many. Yeah, it's more than a dozen, but, and from a bunch of different people, right? Luke built me a Quaken with it. Bob T built a knife with it for me, which was very cool. I don't know. I have a whole bunch of them. So, I kind of have a list of folks I've been sort of working through and like I said, for me, it's a cool thing because it's not like, what I try not to do is say, hey, I want you to use this and this and this. It's more like, hey, I want you to work this handle material in there somehow, but do your thing, man. And sometimes it's been a fun thing because the maker like, I don't give them anything other than a chunk of Westinghouse. And I don't even know what they're going to make until it's done. In other cases, you know, we have at least a brief conversation about it. And in other cases, people want to really work down to the details on what it wants to be up front. And then they build the knife. And so for me, it's been really fun from a collector perspective because I get a little bit more insight, into how each guy works. And sometimes fun things happen if I just say, hey man, figure out how to fit this in. That's all I ask. And someone goes off and, you know, cooks up something different or cool or unusual.
Very cool. So that kind of leads into, you know, what draws you to a knife? You know, is it the design? What makes you enjoy a knife? Is it the maker? You know, a little bit of everything.
Yeah. I think I think a little bit of everything is a really good way to put it, as loose as an answer as that sounds. I think for me, it started out being very much about the shape. And, you know, certainly materials get people's attention. Fancy materials, right, are always cool, shiny object kind of stuff, right? Neat to look at. But I think one of the things that's for me become part of the story and has been very interesting is understanding and learning sort of where everybody's strengths are. When I say everybody's, I'm referring to the knife makers that I've worked with or bought stuff from or whatever. And so like in Gus's case, right? Gus Cecchini, very extremely innovative knife maker, very unique design characteristics, usually has some mechanical or construction trickery going on that I find fascinating. As an engineer, it's very, very cool to me to see some of the crazy things that he does. He works crazy levels of detail, right? Makes his own screws, makes kind of funky, crazy looking little small parts, multi-piece backspacers. I mean, you know, and lots of very, very thought out design. And so on Gus's knives, I like that. I can appreciate that. I can pick up one of Gus's knives and love it because sometimes it's just like a technical accomplishment, you know what I mean? Or it's sort of like a detail fest, right? Like, wow, look at this thing. It's like, the longer you hang on to it, the longer you figure out, oh, I didn't even notice that part. So in Gus's case, that's one of the things that's usually what gets my attention about his work. In other cases, it's not that, right? It's more like, when I got into your knives, Michael, the thing that always kind of drew me to your stuff was the whole very organic look and feel and shape of the knives. And same thing, right? You have very cool details in there, but if you put one of your customs, certainly one of your older customs next to one of Gus's, they're very, very different knives, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, construction wise, design wise, detail wise, very, very different from one another. But, I don't know. For me, there's stuff that clicks, right? That makes sense to me visually and design wise, shape wise. And then there's other stuff that are very nice knives, but to me, they just don't necessarily strike a chord, right? I mean, where plenty of knives at a show like Blade Show where if I have to take a couple minutes and go walk around, you know, I'll come across knives that I think are built well. And I don't really have anything that I don't like about them, but there's also not something that really kind of sparks and gets my attention. And so sometimes it's the shape and look and feel of the knife. Sometimes it's the function of the knife. Sometimes it's straight up design. And then, like you said, sometimes it's the maker. And, I would say, you know, people sometimes say buy the maker, not the knife. Okay. That's nice. I also have some knife maker friends that make wonderful knives that I don't own any of them, right? Just because they might not be my thing.
Yeah.
And I would buy one of their knives. It's just not my thing. It either doesn't fit with what I like to collect or it doesn't feel like something I want to carry every day or whatever. And it doesn't mean that I think they're a bad person or I dislike them, but they just might not be my thing.
There's nothing wrong with that either. It's not every knife is supposed to go to every person or to, appeal to every person.
Right.
And that's, it's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if that really answers your question or not, but
it pretty much does. I mean, materials are not, there's always, or sometimes there's just like a look to a knife, and it can be the most, material wise, the most plain Jane type of knife. You probably saw some of that with like the Sabenza beginning out. Very simple design, but it had a flow to it, had a feel to it, had something about it that drew you in. And a lot of knives will do that. They kind of just speak to you, for lack of a better way of saying that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's any better way to say that.
To me, in a really, this is going to sound like I'm slagging on Luke Burnley, and I'm not. Lucas Burnley, he built one of these Kwaiken folders for me. And to me, that's a really good example of that, where it's not a complex design, right? Mine has bolsters and scales and some details, and it's a very, very nice knife. But the thing that makes, I think, that knife get people's attention is there's something about the shape and the way the whole thing flows that even if people don't think about it in those terms, they see it and they say, oh my gosh, that's a fantastic looking knife.
Mm-hmm.
They might not know why, right? They might not be able to say, oh, it's the way the handle and the blade flow together, in a very integrated way. Okay. They might not be able to put those words to it, but it's like walking into an art gallery and, where you see a piece of art and it strikes a chord with you, right? Like, oh, wow.
Yeah, it just stops you.
It's amazing. There's something cool there. There's something visually striking. And whether you can describe why or not, it just kind of grabs you. And to me, the art museum is a great parallel to this kind of conversation, right? Because I've had that same experience lots of times where, like, Amy and I just had this past summer. We went to Chicago for a few days to see Hamilton, which was super, super amazing and fun. And we ended up going to the Chicago Art Institute, and she is very much not a modern art person. And
Me either.
Well, and I would generally put myself in that category. I mean, I expected to really enjoy the classical art sections of the museum, and I wasn't sure what to expect in the modern art part of the museum. And both of us were absolutely floored when we walked through the modern art part and the, Andy Warhol kind of pieces and other stuff that.
Yeah, those are cool. I do like those.
To me, they were things not unlike knives where in person, in front of your face, they're different. And there were many pieces in that part of the museum that we were both completely floored by. And otherwise, like looking at them on a picture on the internet, you wouldn't think, oh, that's an amazing piece, right? They weren't pieces that got my attention. But when I saw those same pieces in person at scale in a gallery, it was like, holy shit, that's amazing, right? It's very, very cool. It like, you can see things that you don't see in a normal photograph, as dumb as that sounds, but there's something that really grabs your attention.
And I think that can go both ways. Sometimes you see something that looks absolutely amazing, knife or anything, and you see it in person, you're like, oh.
Yeah.
It doesn't do it for you sometimes.
Very true.
With art, it's kind of an interesting lead in, but if money wasn't an object, is there a grail that you would like to add to your collection, or is there a piece from early on that you lusted after? Is there something that, you probably never will be able to afford, maybe an early Emerson when he was doing like the art type pieces? Is there something you'd like to add to your collection that you always wanted?
I thought about this one a little bit. I guess I'm not really sure. I don't know. Amy always likes to say that I'm very impatient about stuff like that, where if I really wanted a specific piece, chances are I would have went and tried to get my hands on it. And if I really wanted it, I probably would have found a way to make that happen. But I've been very fortunate in many ways. One, to have friends that make stuff that in some cases have helped me with pieces like for this Westinghouse collection or even for collector knives, to help get them into my hands. And I think a number of people have had that same kind of experience. Like I was kind of on the hunt for a while for a G10 scaled custom CQC 8 Emerson. And a friend contacted me and said, "Hey, I heard you're looking for one of these, and I wasn't really interested in selling it, but if you are really looking for one, I'll sell it to you." And so I've had many very positive experiences like that, where someone offered me a cool piece that I was really kind of after for a while, and checked many of those boxes for me. So I'm very fortunate and thankful to have people who've helped. And, I've been able to do that for some other folks as well, which is cool. So yeah, I don't know that I have a lot of Grail pieces that, I've had someone ask me before, "Hey, is there one that got away kind of thing? What's your knife that you wish you hadn't sold that you still had?" And probably it would be, that 6K Stellite core piece that Michael made for me that I ended up trading. I would very much like to have that piece back. I know where it is, but I'd have to spend a bunch of money to get it. So that might actually be it.
Yeah, but that kind of opened a different world too.
It did for sure, yeah.
Which has been detrimental to all sorts of pocketbooks. But let's change that a little bit. So let's say that you had, a chance to go to any maker and say, no price, worrying about that or anything like that, and say, "Okay, you can build me something." What would you have done? It could be a future piece, say like, not having to worry about, order books or weights or things like that. Just say, if you can just go to someone and have them build something, what would you have built?
Current maker or anybody?
Anybody, whatever you want, man. This is Imagination Station.
Probably out of anybody, I probably would. I would probably want either an Ivory Bose, Tony Bose, or or like something crazy like a Loveless Subhilt. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting thing for me to say out loud, because I'm not normally a fixed blade collector guy, but I would love to have a very classic, badass Loveless knife. And, just because I think they're historically significant pieces that influence so many people.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a different kind of knife to have. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a good answer. Now, the correct answer was Michael Birch.
I was thinking the correct answer was Michael Walker, but hey.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I don't think there's any wrong answers on that one. I mean, those were good choices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I had a slip joint problem for a little while, and it was interesting because I kind of got into the custom slip joint thing before it became a thing. Like now slip joints are hot, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But for 4 years ago or 5 years ago, they weren't. And it was sort of an interesting thing for me to kind of go off into that world. And it was really fun because you could get excellent, very high quality, very well made, slip joints from dirt cheap compared to tactical knife stuff, and even order book stuff with lots of people in very short time frames, relatively speaking. And so I actually have some pieces of this Westinghouse kind of lineup with Westinghouse that I sent them or that they had that all kind of fits the mold. And there's 3 or 4 slip joints in there that are really, really fun and cool pieces that kind of came from my slip joint excursion. So, but I've never owned one of Tony's knives, so I would love to have one sometime.
Well, there for a while, you can pick up some of these guys' very clean, super nice slip joints for $500, which is just crazy.
Right. Or a lot less even, believe it or not.
Yeah. What was the fellow that he's very prolific? he's into the thousands. Like he numbers each one. What is his name?
Todd Davison.
Todd Davison.
Yep.
Yeah, those were very affordable and very good looking slip joints.
They're very clean and yeah, he does really nice work. His thing was kind of interesting because I got on his list and he ended up building me. I love swayback jacks in the slip joint side of things. That's my thing. I love swaybacks. And, so Todd actually built me a matched pair of swaybacks, and one is like tactical knife guy style. It's black canvas, smooth bolster, and like a dark etched stonewash kind of blade. So it's very dark, kind of almost like industrial looking slip joint, which is kind of cool. It's sort of a mix of worlds, right? And then the sister piece to it is an identical pattern that has Westinghouse and hand rub blade and pinch bolsters with flutes and the whole deal, like a dressed out version. So it's kind of like a light and dark pair that a mix and match.
That's pretty awesome.
Very cool. Like yin and yang.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a really fun project just because, he's like, okay, you wanted two, right? I'm like, yep. He goes, what do you want? I said, I want opposites. I don't know. I'm not sure what else to do. So that would be really fun to try. And, they came out really cool. Yeah, they're neat pieces.
Good time to make you one that worked and one that didn't. Here's your opposites.
Yeah. But Todd was good to work with, and he makes really great knives. So,
and that's what's awesome about the slip joints. Like going back to like your description of your grandfather, I think that's kind of an image we all sort of want to emulate. That a nice knife, a watch, or whatever, your dress up is to you. You want to be that gentlemanly type of person. And the slip joints kind of fit the bill. Or, the dressed up knives these days. Where tactical's kind of shifted to. Right.
Yeah, I love, Brett Dowell built me a 2-blade, Warncliffe jack that just a fantastic piece. It's another Westinghouse piece from that lineup, and just a cool piece, man. And it's really funny because that was an interesting exploratory thing because it's like, okay, I've never had a 2-blade custom. I had a Boy Scout knife, right? But I never had a custom slip joint that was a multiple blade thing. Richard Rogers makes these fantastic, amazing multi-blade custom slip joints. And so I would love to have one of those sometime. But even this thing, right? A 2-blade. How cool would that be? So when my name came up on Brett's books, it's like, I'm like, you down for making a 2-blade, man? He's like, oh yeah, I'll do that. That'd be cool. So boom.
And you've got some Doc T pieces too, don't you?
I do not have any Dr. T pieces. I wish I did. Jason Tabor, I've talked to him a whole bunch of times right when he first started actually. And, but I've never gotten either knives from either one of those guys.
Huh. I could have swore you had one. Maybe you were showing me one that you thought about buying.
Exactly. Yeah. It's probably what it was. Cause I've really, both of those guys make really nice stuff.
So, okay. You do the ray gun beads. I think most people know that.
Yep.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So there's some douche that lives down in Missouri, and
not it.
I've been to visit him a couple times, a few times now, and spend some time in the shop and goof around and work on a knife or work on a project. And so I was there, and we were gonna make a knife that had sort of a vintage sci-fi kind of feel. So it was supposed to be this science fiction knife, like, funky shaped spaceships and aliens and ray guns and all that kind of stuff. And so we jacked around quite a bit trying to come up with a design that would fit this whole rocket sci-fi kind of thing. And we couldn't really hit on something with the knife. So that spun off into a knife that ended up being about cars that were influenced by the space age. And so that project turned out really cool. But from that, we talked a bunch about ray guns and rockets and all that. So we did the bottle rocket thing. That was fun. And the ray gun bead was something that came out of that, where Michael was working on something and I was over trying to break his lathe, playing around with turning some bronze on his lathe, and came up with a couple different ideas for something that looked a little bit like a ray gun. and sort of settled on one of them and took it from there. So
somewhere around here, I've still got that barrel that I made.
Yeah.
But yeah, that how long ago was that?
At least 2 years ago, maybe 3 now. I think I started when that went from like a prototype to being a real thing. I think that was 2015, believe it or not.
Huh.
Doesn't seem like 3 years ago, but
no.
Yeah. And so that kind of spun off into like, okay, this bead looks kind of cool. It was sort of big, I thought at the time. I wasn't sure if people would like it because it seemed large. And but they've been very popular. Folks seem to really enjoy them. I got versions that take little tritium vials and all that, and that all fits with that same kind of theme. So, yeah, it's been a fun project, and I like that it came out of something where we were goofing around, kicking around ideas. That's pretty cool for me.
There may have been beer involved too.
There was a lot of beer involved.
Uh-huh.
So, how's the ray gun bead thing changed your perspective on the knife community, since you're seeing things from the other side of the table now sometimes?
Yeah, it definitely has changed things a little bit. One of the things it made painfully clear to me was how much more fun it is to be at a knife show as a collector than it is to be at a knife show as a
right
as a seller of products.
A vendor.
A vendor, yeah. So slanging beads is not nearly as much fun as wandering around the show. So that's been a very interesting thing. I mean, for sure, it's exposed me to some other stuff that I know you guys struggle with it on occasion. People that are demanding or have expectations or can't possibly be ever satisfied or other stuff. And so, you know, that's been very interesting to see. And at the same time, I think both from knowing many of you guys and visiting the shops of some different people and kind of trying to really understand the whole microeconomy of it all, for me has been really interesting. And I think as a collector, it definitely has changed how I approach knife shows and dealing with people. And you know what I mean? It's arguably it's made me slightly more pessimistic about most of that. But not necessarily in a really bad way. I like to think in more of a constructive kind of way, but I definitely have a better appreciation, I think, for some of the struggles you guys have from a customer-based perspective and dealing with people.
I think it definitely opens your eyes to the market itself and how it flows, and in a more sort of worrisome sometimes way. You know, about wonder where it's going, why it's doing that, you know, which is kind of interesting to watch and see where it goes. But definitely makes you more aware of it, I think. You know, when you
for sure
your sales depend on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, no question, it's different for me because it's not my income, right? It's not the way I make a living. It's kind of like a thing that helps me be able to buy knives and stuff. So it's very much a side project for me, but at the same time, I've absolutely felt that same stress of, wow, I hope these things sell, right? Especially at the beginning when I wasn't sure if people would actually buy them or not. And I had for me, significant, initial investment to get this all in motion. And, that was scary, right? I mean, it was like any other new business venture kind of thing. But it also has been very interesting to me from a human being perspective, and the idea of building a brand and maintaining a brand and trying to keep things fresh and moving forward and, you know, that kind of stuff. Those things obviously aren't easy, right? You guys deal with it all the time. And for me, I think it's given me a little bit more insight into some of that stuff, right? How do I keep people interested? What do I have to do to, you know, keep the product relevant and moving forward? And so that it's been educational for sure.
Yeah. Sometimes that's kind of fun. I mean, it really is kind of fun to to kind of stretch out and see what you can do, with the market. And it's interesting.
Yeah. And, the one nice part about it is that it's kind of had enough legs at this point that it's allowed me to start working on some other related stuff, right? Like, some people might have seen a little teaser pic on a snippet of a piece of art that's being worked on for me. That's going to kind of turn into a merch project and other stuff related to the ray gun thing. And, I wouldn't have really necessarily been able to do that without this thing having some forward motion. So, very fun and opens some doors to doing some other things that I enjoy, like in this case, working with an artist and some other stuff. So more to come on that. It'll be really cool when it's done.
I'm looking forward to that.
Awesome.
Very cool.
And then there's been a couple collaboration things going on. So John Brown, the Scoopy Loops bead guy, John has done a bunch of finish work on beads in the past where I sent him some raw beads, and then he comes up with some crazy colors and finishes. And so he did some a little while ago, and he just recently sent me another batch. So I'll have some of those we're going to drop here hopefully very shortly. And those have been a hugely popular thing. John's got a massive following, and the kind of finished stuff that he does suits the ray gun bead thing very, very well. So for him, it's been cool because it gives him an opportunity to experiment on a different kind of canvas, right? Because my beads are a little different than his. And from my perspective, it's fun because it's like, wow, how the hell did he do that? So pretty neat. And then I think I mentioned a while back that I had another kind of funky collaboration thing going. So I had someone that is circling all the way back to my initial involvement in knives. I had someone involved in some flashlight stuff reach out to me about doing a collaboration, and so that's going to happen here shortly too. So more to come on that when it's ready.
Cool.
But yeah, it'll be a good pairing, right? The whole ray gun bead thing and a cool flashlight be a really neat combo.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool.
So that's the kind of some of the stuff that I wouldn't have necessarily been involved with or worked on without this thing having moved. So thank you to everybody that's been supporting that project over the last few years.
So you're a watch collector. What watches are you into now, and what got you into them in the first place? I'm guessing your granddad?
He was definitely the influence for me. He actually, if I remember right, he always had a Seiko and dress watch. For his era, they were always small watches microscopic watches compared to the stuff that many of us wear today. But he was definitely someone who had a good watch, and he considered that part of, his thing. And I've always really liked watches. Before I was into the knife thing, I wasn't ever really super into the military watch thing, but I had a small collection of stuff that I learned about through, MWR, the military watch resource on the web. They're kind of old school bulletin board place. And so I had a bunch of issue watches, from a few different eras, and countries. And so that was really cool. And then from there, when I started to go to shows, that was the first time I'd ever seen a Panerai in person. And that really got my attention because I thought they were crazy, fantastic, gigantic watches. And so I kind of got very interested in the Panerai thing. And so ended up trading a very, very cool knife and some money for a Panerai. And that's what got me started in the whole thing. And so it kind of went from there. So mostly Panerai and Rolex stuff for me.
Has that knife been talked about already?
It has.
Yeah, I kind of assumed.
Yeah. If it hadn't been for that knife, I probably wouldn't have gotten as far or as fast into it as I did. So,
but I think we see that a lot these days. There's a lot of kind of back and forth with the watches and knives and whatnot.
For sure. And it's been very interesting. There are many common themes. Guitars and music, motorcycles, guns, knives, watches. There's like there's like some kind of genetic consistent genetic trait that people kind of ping on, in some cases, many of those. So I don't know how many people I've met at knife shows that are into like 3 or 4 of those things I just rattled off. So there's definitely a lot of crossover.
There's a lot of watches at knife shows. It's the best place to check out watches for sure.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're fortunate that we have one of these Red Bar groups here in the Detroit area that are basically like, to me, it's very much like a USN get together, but instead of being about knives, it's about watches.
Oh, wow.
And so I've gotten a little bit involved in that, and that's been very, very fun. Really nice people, and a great way to see, in some cases, some very unique and interesting watches. And, maybe not as many watches, like Michael said, as you'd come across at a knife show, but very eclectic collections in some cases. And just fascinating stuff that people are into is really, really cool to see. So that's been fun too. But yeah, the whole tiny mechanical marvel ticking away at how many beats per minute, 21,000 beats per minute or whatever on your wrist doing work for you is fascinating to me. So it appeals to my engineer side for sure. And the design aspect of it, right? I mean, there's like the Panerai thing, right? With the crown guard and all that stuff. It's very iconic.
There's a lot that goes into them. You know, you got your mechanical side that just fascinated by the movement and what it can do. And the fact that it works, not only works, but it works while you're wearing it, banging against stuff and doing on stuff. And for many, many, many years, you know, you've got some have the great history, you know, your Rolexes, Panerais, and a lot of these other brands. And then you've got, like you said, the design, materials, all these things combined to make it very desirable, very interesting.
Absolutely.
To a lot of people.
Well, yeah. And it's interesting because it's like the generation that's out there now, it's like some of them have no idea. So my son has a Seiko automatic, and, it was sitting in his room and it went dead, and his friends are like, "Hey, your watch, the battery's dead. You're going to have to fix it." And he's like, "No, it doesn't have a battery." And they're like, "How does that work?" They didn't believe him, and he picked it up and did the swirling, you know, and wound it and started going, and they were like, their minds were blown, you know?
Right.
And it's really cool. I mean, I love the mechanical watches. Even if they're not as accurate, they're more than accurate enough for what I need.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's, I really enjoy the watch thing. It's, like I said, the Red Bar thing's been really fun because it's another group of people. But same thing, right? A very like-minded group of people in many ways, and, another set of personalities and a great way, just like going to a knife show and being able to see knives either on the table or that your friends or someone that you might come across brought to the show. I've had many experiences at knife shows where, okay, yeah, there's a lot of nice knives here, and boy, that knife is cool and that knife is cool. And then someone walks up and says, "Oh, hey man, check this thing out that I just got." And it's like, whoa, super mind blown. You know,
yep.
I get introduced to a new maker that way, or a new pattern that they came up with, or, you know, I don't know. It's been very cool. So.
Well, super cool, man. I know I personally learned a lot about you tonight, Mark. I think it's going to make going forward much more relevant and interesting.
Definitely. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely.
Yeah, I feel like these have been some very long intros to, you know, the meat of what we're getting into. But I think it's important for everybody to understand where we're coming from, where everybody's coming from when we talk about things in the future.
Agree.
Well, yeah. It's an understanding of where our perspectives are coming from.
So,
yeah.
Do you guys have anything going on in the shop right now? Sean?
I rewired my mill this week. My mini mill shit the bed, and after I replaced the speed knob, that wasn't it, so I had to completely replace the circuit board in the back, and I finally got that took care of, so I'm back up and running semi-proper this week.
Excellent.
Yeah, hell yeah. I didn't realize how much I relied on that little mill until it shit the bed.
What about you, Michael?
I've been jacking around with some rocket pods and stuff like that, and working on some liner locks, and looking at the pile of the V4s and going, man, I need to get that shit going.
Trying to get back into the swing of it after TKI.
Yeah, organizing, doing cleaning and all that stuff too that you kind of have to do, kind of put stuff back where they're supposed to belong, order new materials, all that fun stuff.
Yep.
Well, yourself, Tom, what do you...
I had the flu last week, so still work through most of it. I had to put in a lot of hours. We've got the Haas mini mill scheduled for delivery next week, and it's been interesting. We've basically they have a list of requirements that you have to meet in order to have the mill delivered, or I guess it voids the warranty. So,
wow.
Strangely enough, knowing how to run it is not one of them.
Bonus. The power requirements were pretty crazy. We've literally spent about $9,000 in the last 2 weeks just trying to get the power requirements met. And it's pretty intense. And then it has to be unloaded by licensed riggers, and so we're trying to get them to come out and schedule it. And they've come out, looked at the place, and decided that it wouldn't fit in the back door. So yesterday they ripped the back of the shop off, and I now have a 9-foot door in the back. But
wow.
Every day it's something else trying to get this thing here. But trying to make knives in between to pay for all that stuff too. So it's kind of fun. But looks like next Wednesday, I think, is Valentine's Day. It's supposed to show up.
Oh, that's sweet.
It's going to be a love story.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. It's like Tom says, "Oh man, I got the flu. I'm sick as hell, man. It's bad." And like, yeah, wow, how about that? And the guy's over there making bushcraft axes, and it's like, damn.
Yeah, it's
hardest working man in show business, man.
I don't know. Last week was rough. I ate a lot of Tylenol and Motrin, but we made it through. So,
do you remember making that axe? Or
yeah, I remember all of last week. I remember this week too. But sometimes it wasn't good. Last week I was coughing pretty bad, and it was a kind of coughing that just like takes you down to your knees. Got through that.
What about those bushcraft pieces, Tom? You want to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, so it's a new product. It's our bushcraft axe. Pretty excited about it. I've wanted to do something this size for a while. It's basically small enough to fit in your backpack. It's about 12 inches, little under overall. And you can carve with them and chop with them, and I think they're going to be really good for starting fires and stuff like that. The original, the prototype I made in the shop, but then I had 30 pieces made. We outsourced them, so they were made 30 miles away at a machine shop, and they CNC'd them. And the exciting thing is the next batch will be made here in the shop, hopefully. On the Haas.
Awesome.
And, so far, we've got about half of them glued up, and we're getting ready to start doing some grinding, and hopefully we're going to start delivering them next week. So pretty exciting.
Very, very cool. And so was that a thing where people was that like a pre-order list kind of thing, or?
Yeah. Yeah. So the signature series we do, I usually try to have the blades heat treated already, and we've got like most of the materials, and they're in the process. And then what we'll do is we'll do a pre-sale, and then that's basically what we work on for the next week or two and get them all delivered. So fortunately we had those in house.
Very cool.
Like I said, the electrical has been crazy expensive. So we got the electrician's bill, and I was not expecting it to be what it was, and we were able to put this up and get started on these and actually pay for it so we could get the mill. We have to have this stuff in place before we can even say, hey, ship the mill. So now this is set up and we have power. So
While you're talking about your stringent electrical requirements, Birch is looking over at where his 110 plug out of his Haas is jammed into a melted box on the wall.
You mean the one that I spilt ferric chloride down?
Yeah. I was wondering this week. I have been wondering if it was wise to go with the Super Mini Mill 2. I think overall I'm going to be happier with it, but it's definitely been painful.
You're going to have more tools, more speed. Yeah, that's all awesome.
Once it's here, no doubts. But this week, man, every time I turn around, it's something else. Like when the riggers came out and they're like, yeah, it's not going to fit in your back door. I was like, oh, really? Awesome. Guess what? Another $2,000. No big deal. So
they didn't think it was going to fit in mine, but I measured and they had a solid inch. And it was magical watching them getting that thing in.
Yeah, I was like 6 inches short. Story of my life.
The phrasing to that whole thing, I am sitting here biting my lip. I mean, it started with they couldn't fit it in my back door. The fact that this is all I've said, I should get a pat on the back.
Sean gets the Good Behavior Award this week.
Awesome. I think this was a good show. We haven't done it, Sean. Do you have a word of the show? Word of the day?
Dormiviglia.
Oh, we'll have to Google that.
The Dormiviglia is the place between consciousness and sleep.
Dormiviglia. Very nice. I found myself trapped there the other day, oddly enough.
Like with a night terror or sleep paralysis or?
Like I woke up, but I wasn't really awake. And I was very much in a state of confusion.
That's crazy.
It was very odd.
That sounds awesome.
It was a very interesting experience. I was almost sure I was awake. I had not exactly stopped a dream. And my brain started going very fast about, what day is it? Am I supposed to be up right now? Am I supposed to be sleeping right now? What exactly is supposed to be going on? So yeah, I hung out there a little longer than I ever have. It was very interesting.
Shit, I already forgot what the word was.
Dormiviglia.
Dormiviglia.
Nice.
Very cool. All right. Yeah. Special announcements. You guys have anything other stuff you want to talk about? Project wise, work wise, like I said, the only thing going on for me is that right now is the thing with John Brown. So I'll have some little Scoopy Loop ray guns over the next week or so. Hopefully, he's had a whole bunch of sales going on, so we've been trying to leave a little space in there, and we'll get those moving. I know folks are pretty excited about those. So, all right. So show wise, since we talked a bunch about shows this time, the next big show, I just actually it's not a coincidence, probably that Big Wave Dave's name came up earlier in the conversation. So Big Wave Dave at USN, Mr. David Moon, he used to keep a thread on USN that had all of the knife shows. And he did a fantastic job over the years of listing knife shows out so people knew where and when to go find a knife show. And so he's been a very busy guy in real life for the past couple years. And I talk to him every once in a while, but he said he wouldn't mind if I updated that thread for him. So the first post on USN in the current knife shows section is a thing called List of Current Shows, oddly enough. And I just updated it this morning. So it has all of what I would consider the major shows for this year listed out with location, date, name of the show, a link to a place where you can find more info and some other stuff. So people that are interested in learning more about knife shows or where they might be able to catch one somewhere remotely close to them, if you're part of USN, you can go there and check it out. We'll try to talk about them here, I think, as we go through. That seemed like a good deal to you guys, talk about shows coming up.
I think so.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So the next one I have on the list on the USN thread is the Hawaii show, which I would love to go to sometime. I know Amy would be 100% on board with going to a knife show in that case. So that's coming up on February 17th, the Hawaii Knife and Tactical Show in Honolulu. So if you're in Hawaii, go check that out. The next one that I'm going to personally is the East Coast show. That's the Fort Lauderdale show. And that's March 16th and 17th. And that's been a fun show. it's a small show, so somebody that wants to check out a show that doesn't want to deal with the overwhelming insanity of Blade Show or the craziness of Vegas, the East Coast show in Fort Lauderdale, or even the Jersey Knife Show, the New York Custom Knife Show in November, or the Kentucky Show. All those are great smaller shows where I think the people are cool, very fun crowd, and nice folks to hang out with. So East Coast, the next one I'm going to do. Now, you guys aren't going to the East Coast show, right?
I am not.
No, sir.
I'm off till Blade.
Same here.
Off till Blade show.
That's right in the middle of school time, and it's, with little kids, it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's nice knowing that there's nothing between TKI and Blade, honestly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's almost like a little break or something.
Feels
I don't
like
know. It seems like then you got Blade, then you got The Gathering creeping up right after that, and it just seems like it just steamrolls.
Abby's going to be listening to this, and she's going to say, did he just say break?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it. Hopefully people survive this long with Mark's boring life story. But as usual, thanks everybody for listening. We appreciate all the feedback. Sorry, this one came out a little bit late. We're going to try to be on about a 2-week schedule. And I don't think we decided exactly what the next show topic is yet, right?
Nope.
Oh, yeah. We did.
Yeah.
Oh, we did?
Man, we have.
I thought we were pretty well in agreement on Skagel.
Okay.
We're hitting Skagel hard and heavy.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Awesome.
what I've been doing my legwork on.
That's me too, but I didn't know we'd 100%, but perfect.
I think it was like a hive mind thing. It was understood. We all knew, and we didn't need to say it.
I thought about it real hard the other day, so I assumed you would be thinking about it too.
I felt that.
Come on, Tom.
Yeah.
Stay out of my head, Birch. Stay out of my head.
So that'll be our first big deep dive. So stay tuned, and we're going to do a bunch of homework and have a interesting conversation and learn a little history about Skagel and his knives.
Excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. To learn more about our makers, you can find Tom Crine on the web at crineknives.net, in his Facebook group, Crine Knives, or in his Instagram account, at Crine Knives. For Michael Birch, check birchtreeblades.com, Facebook group Birch Tree Blade Works, or Michael's Instagram, at birchtreeblades. For myself and the Raygun Bead Project, we're on the web at raygundivision.com. We have a Facebook group called Raygun Division, or my personal Instagram, at @msteiner. For those interested in photos, references from the show, or some discussion about the show itself, you can find us on the web at markofthemaker.com, in a Facebook group called Mark of the Maker, or on our Instagram, at Mark of the Maker. Last but not least, the ultra cool and haunting background music we use for the show is a piece called Noir Guitar by Stevie's Amp Shack, found at the Free Music Archive and licensed under Creative Commons CC BY 4.0. Thanks for listening.